You're listening to the Big Cast, your source for the latest in financial technology. Brought to you weekly by the Best Innovation Group, with your hosts, John Best and Glenn Sarvati.
Welcome to another edition of the Big Cast. My name is Glenn Sarvati on behalf of the Best Innovation Group, where we like to do cool things with financial technology. And we've got a pair of interviews that I think fall right into that category that we'll be presenting to you today. We'll be speaking to Ceci Peter, who is the co-founder of a company called KSAP that just won the Next Big Idea competition out at the NACUSO Network Conference a couple weeks ago. So we'll be hearing about their startup. And then Ann Legg, our old friend from Thrive Strategic Services, will be sharing some thoughts on what credit unions need to do to set a foundation to successfully leverage generative AI. As always, I'll remind you can check out more about the Best Innovation Group at our website, big-fintech.com, where you'll find all kinds of things about our variety of products and services, including around generative AI. And you'll also find past episodes of the podcast on the media tab. You'll also be able to track us down wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Music, etc., etc. A few pieces of news. I always like to kind of start with things that kind of caught my eye in the marketplace in the past week. One of the stories that I thought was particularly impactful at some point down the road, Stripe, the unicorn company, unicorn several times over, has made the announcement that they are going to be decoupling payments from their overall platform and tech stack, if you want to call it that. That is a pretty major strategic shift, given that Stripe is and was a payments company at its core. I think if you really kind of read between the lines in some of the conversations and even the quotes in the press release, the Collison brothers have kind of mentioned that it kind of became a necessity as they continue to court bigger customers. The solution with Stripe kind of being all bundled together with your payments and your broader technology stack together makes more sense for smaller companies, but the larger ones tend to kind of want to manage those separately and have the latitude to strike their own deals on the payment side. So it's a function of success to some extent, but also kind of complicates the situation further in terms of the way these things work. We seem to have gone through the bundling, unbundling, bundling process multiple times, and I suspect that's a pendulum that's not going to stop swinging anytime soon. It's almost if the conventional wisdom goes too far in one direction, it may not suit everyone in the marketplace, and that creates an opportunity to take the contrarian view. So interesting one to me. The other one that I found interesting was the National Retail Federation filed a formal objection letter to the Visa and MasterCard settlement, which we've covered quite a bit in the past. They didn't pull back too many punches. I think I think cranky or salty might be the right word in terms of the way they pointed it out. One of the quotes I saw, they kind of feel that they're not being heard. Let's put it that way. A direct quote from the letter: "Despite our unique position in relationship to the merchant community, counsel for 5 small merchants have effectively frozen us out." They also complained that the settlement amount, which has been widely reported as $30 billion, is a drop in the bucket, as they say. And they also say that it represents only temporary relief. It covers the next 5 years. If anybody out there can predict where the payments world and interchange and things like pay by bank and other solutions like that are going to be 5 years from now, give me a call. We should probably team up and do some strategic work together, because that's a pretty tough one to figure out. So it's an interesting thing. Another interesting piece in the NRF's letter is they admit that one of the key provisions that was negotiated about the ability to surcharge for specific cards based on cost, they admit that very few merchants are likely to do that for competitive reasons. So the idea being, merchants often complain about rewards cards and how they're very expensive to accept. This settlement gives them the option to go ahead and charge extra if that type of card is being used. I've been skeptical that they would take that step. The NRF seems to be skeptical of it too, which gets you back into that question. I can understand why they're a little frustrated, but if the ability is there and the merchant chooses not to do it, it's kind of interesting. They also, I like the way that they point out that there is no opt-out provision for the other merchants. Listen, I do think that there are some valid points that the National Retail Federation is making here. That I think there are some things that are a little bit weird about this one. But it's really hard to be sympathetic given the way they have taken such a hard line on this 19-year-old lawsuit, and then suddenly we have an opportunity. I don't exactly know what they thought was going to come out of this otherwise, but they point out that it's being basically settled by 5 class action plaintiffs, including, as they put it, a hair salon, a pharmacy, a dentist, and like entities. Throwing a little shade there. I guess hair salons aren't a big constituency for the NRF. Anyway, like I say, I do see some points to their objections, but they're not the most sympathetic of parties from my perspective. The next big idea competition, as I mentioned, this was one of the highlights of the NACUSO Network Conference a couple of weeks back. 6 companies got on stage. There was a panel of judges that did Q&A with them, but the decision of who the winner was entirely up to audience vote. 2 of the companies rose to the top. Between them, they actually got 2/3 of the overall audience vote. The winner clearly resonated, and I think if you think about their solution of dispute resolution, and as they put it, really helping keep the experience positive for your true members while protecting yourself against the bad actors and saving money in the process. I can see how that certainly resonates well. That's KSAP, and we'll be talking to them shortly. The runner-up was Debbie, who are old friends of ours. We've been following them since we first saw them at Finovate a few years back. I believe we've already reported also that they are now working closely and are integrated with MSU FCU in Michigan, Michigan State University's credit union. And I'll post a link. I spoke to Frida Leibowitz on site out there as well, and they're doing very nicely and have pivoted quite nicely into working directly with credit unions, and have more coming up on that front too. But as I said, the winner was KSAP. Ceci Peter, who was the co-founder and now the chief technology officer, was kind enough to catch up. The award was given right at the tail end of the show, as I had to hightail it out to catch a plane. But we caught up a couple days later, and here's what we had to say. I'm here with Ceci Peter, the co-founder and chief technology officer of KSAP, the company that won the next big idea competition at NACUSO last week, and with a very impressive showing. Ceci, first off, thanks so much for taking the time to talk, and congratulations again.
No, thank you so much, Glenn. I mean, NACUSO is super exciting, and this is probably my second ever podcast.
Oh,
and
wow.
all of them happened within NACUSO, so I'm excited.
Oh, that's right. I saw you out there speaking to the folks from Venture, or I guess with Circles podcast, correct?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I say, you won the competition, and I think it's pretty clear that you have, with what you're doing with KSAP, you've really landed on a pain point that resonates with credit unions. Because I was talking to folks in the audience, it's an audience vote, and just even chatting with folks even before and after they cast their vote, they clearly were, very, taken by the idea that you can solve an issue around dispute resolution and kind of both improving the member experience as well as the cost aspects of it. So maybe let you say for a second what KSAP seeks out to do.
Absolutely. So KSAP essentially turns negative moments when members experience fraud or disputes into loyalty retaining moments. And essentially, how do you support good faith members while protecting yourself against bad actors? That's what KSAP does.
I think that's a really great, kind of encapsulated version of what you're looking to do. I also saw on your website, we turn disputes and chargebacks into a better member experience, a more efficient back office process, and reduce the loss rates. I mean, it's a tall order, and if you can pull that off, that's wonderful. I notice in your background that you actually have spent time at Chime and also at Facebook. Can you maybe say a bit about? I think you mentioned you and your co-founder, this is your first venture into the startup world yourselves. Can you say a bit about how you landed on this solution and what brought you to the table here?
Yeah, it's honestly really funny where KSAP isn't an idea that just came out one day. It's really an accumulation of experiences. And so I started my journey in technology at Facebook, and that's where I met my co-founder, Shanti. And she actually left Facebook within 8 months, joined Robinhood, because she was always interested in everything fintech. But while I was at Facebook, what was really interesting was that I used to work on AI. And what's incredible is that 90% of spam on Facebook is caught by AI, 99%. And so you can imagine that if Facebook didn't have that scale or that automation, you'd have 10,000 or 100,000 more people manually working on things. But that was kind of the first insight into, hey, how can you use technology to make a better customer or a better member experience at the other side? So I left Facebook and eventually I found myself at Chime. And what was really interesting was that I joined Chime just about when COVID was picking up. And as you can remember, the stimulus checks went out and everyone was excited, especially in the fintech or transactional revenue business, because volumes are going up. But the downside is I used to work on everything risk and fraud. So transaction volume is growing up, people are spending more, but then fraud has also gone up 10x. And what was incredible was that we were completely under the cosh and we're wondering, okay, how do we actually solve this? We're not going to be able to hire 10 times more people. And the answer was truly technology. And so at that moment, honestly, we really wanted to really better the member experience up front. But when we went to the market to buy software to help us manage disputes or help the fraud problem, we couldn't find any. And so that's when my team at Chime essentially built this amazing dispute solution that automated about 40% of our dispute volume. And so it was incredible where overnight when we deployed this solution, we went up to incredible, amazing member experiences in a sense that before there were long queues, members were waiting for hours on phone, and now you had automated solutions that gave them a resolution in a day or within hours. And I think that's when the idea of KSAP started, but didn't know yet I was onto something. So I happened to chat with Shanti, and Robinhood was facing the same problem. They had the GameStop incident. They also had a debit card program out, and they're also facing a lot of volumes. And incidentally, they couldn't find anything on the market for their problems. And so she was building something internally. So at that point, we have mirror roadmaps. Shanti's building something. I'm building something similar. We said, hey, why can't we just build this for everyone else? We don't want everyone to experience this same pain. And that's essentially how KSAP came about. We're both just trying to scratch independent itches.
That's fascinating. And it's also fascinating that you like started and met each other at Facebook and then both branched out into, name brands in the fintech space that both had that issue. And I think you mentioned you didn't start saying, hey, let's focus on credit unions. That actually became a logical, go-to-market strategy for you along the way. Can you say a little bit about how you wound up in the credit union space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing was just for Shanti and I, it was always more of how can everyone win and how do you start with the member? And I don't think there's anyone better in the financial industry in terms of putting the member first. And I think that's logically how we ended up in the credit union space because it wasn't about, hey, how much more profit or how many more bips of loss you could reduce. It's more of, can you actually build an amazing experience that's radically different from what people see when they use their banks? Because, I had a dispute with a bank. I had to fax in a letter 2 weeks later, or I couldn't even email it back. I had to go drop it off at a branch physically. But for us, our value prop was, okay, let's start with the amazing customer experience, amazing member experience for anyone using any financial institution. And it was brilliant to see this opening where, hey, as a credit union, you could actually use this to differentiate yourself, especially when everyone's going digital and trying to amass, credibility or trying to build a brand and have better member engagement.
Gotcha. One thing that I was a little bit surprised by that you mentioned during your presentation is your revenue model is a flat annual license fee. I mean, when I think about this kind of a product, I would have thought it would somehow be based on a volume metric or something like that. And then I know you also do offer the opportunity to outsource the dispute resolution process. Can you say a bit about your revenue model?
Yeah, absolutely. So a revenue model is just essentially a technology fee, and this is when you just use KSAP for your team. And so your team is internally managing the disputes. And I think really for us, it was really more of KSAP only survives or works for you if not only all your team works or uses KSAP. So we don't want to charge per seat, but also the fact that KSAP grows with your organization. And we believe in our efficiency so much that nothing should really change value prop wise, whether you have 5,000 disputes a month versus 10,000 disputes. It does change into a volume-based model when you start outsourcing the management to KSAP. And so that's when we're using our technology to automate the entire experience end to end. And a better analogy for us, honestly, is more of, what is the difference between you having 1,000 emails in your Gmail inbox versus 10,000 emails? I think the experience is the same, and we really want to deliver that value first to credit unions.
And you're relatively agnostic whether they use it just purely on the license and implement internally versus use your back office process?
Yes. And so it's really honestly meeting where the team they are. And so I'd probably say it's maybe a 70-30 split where the credit unions we're talking to are 70% They just don't want to think about disputes. They want to outsource it, have it managed in a nice little package. Other folks are saying, actually, we want to bring this in-house and we can kind of consolidate our teams and actually build an integrated experience.
Wow, that's interesting. I would have guessed maybe the opposite in terms of the 70-30 split. I would have thought it might have gone the other way, but that's and I thought maybe it might play into the size of the credit union. Are you working kind of across the gamut in terms of asset size, or do you tend to focus more on the smaller or larger ones?
Working across the gamut. And so I honestly, as you said, it kind of correlates with size. So we do realize the smaller credit unions are actually happy bringing this in-house. The larger ones, they just admit, you know what, I think this is something that will take away from higher priority initiatives. We just want to continue with having this as a managed service.
We should mention, I had not been able to put two and two together until we spoke just before we started recording. The name KSAP, it didn't immediately, I'm like, is that some fancy term? And you mentioned it's kind of an acronym, it's CASE ASAP. I mean, getting this thing done as fast as possible, which again, I mean, the talk about, the magic, harmonic convergence. If you can, both make the customer happy, the member happy by doing it quickly, and also save the cost by not having to take up as much labor. I mean, that is, about as good of a win-win as you're going to find.
Yeah, and I think that's what gets me excited. Essentially, I think of it as just a three-point solution in a sense that one, building great member experiences, delivering delight, getting outcomes as soon as possible. So member engagement goes up, retention goes up. Two is, as you said, reducing the OpEx cost, not having to staff as many people or being able to reallocate those people to other higher priority tasks. And the last one is defending against fraud, increasing your win rates. And so across three dimensions, KSAP can actually really get you the ROI. And so that's what we're seeing with our non-credit union customers, where you're actually getting ROI within the first 2-3 months of implementation because there's different avenues of getting that value.
You mentioned also, I want to make sure I understand this a little bit better. I think you mentioned a 6 to 8 week typical core integration process, but you also mentioned you can be live in as little as 2 weeks with a non-integrated version. What can you distinguish how that kind of works between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll probably say the 2-week non-integrated version is essentially a path to that integrated experience. So usually for a customer, they'll come in and say, hey, this core integration sounds great. It'll take a while, but can we actually just experience this platform for a bit? And that's when we throw them onto the non-integrated version. And it's really more of, you still have the amazing case management. Things are a bit manual, such as sending out letters, but you really get to see how KSAP works and you see the benefits and the analytics and all the amazing experiences for your team.
So it's an intermediate step toward what you see as the end game, which is the full integration.
Precisely, yeah. And I think for most people, it's a no-brainer. We haven't yet met someone who says, you know what, let me just stick with the non-integrated version. I think as soon as you start using the non-integrated version, you get excited. You want to get the full picture. You want to get the full deal.
So the best place for people to find out more, it's KSAP, CASAPHQ.com.
I think the website doesn't really communicate our value prop right now, but in 2 weeks, it'll be right there. It'll be all refreshed. And I think it'll be a bit more accessible in terms of what we do or what we can do for your teams and members.
Wonderful. And, so anybody who goes to visit the site right after we post this, you may be seeing the earlier version, but, check back in and you'll see something else. Any other way that people can find out more?
People can, just shoot me an email. It's just Saisi, SAISI at KSAPHQ, CASAPHQ.com.
Wonderful. Saisi Peter, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of KSAP. Interesting stuff. Congratulations again on your win out at Next Big Idea, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you in the marketplace.
No, thank you so much, Glenn, for having me. And again, couldn't have done it without my co-founder. And I really appreciate everyone who showed up at Nakuso and who voted for us. I think it's just exciting exciting moment in our early days in this community.
Also saw my friend Ann Legg down there from Thrive Strategic Services. She was at the Nakuso conference. She had also participated in our town hall a few weeks before that in early April. Great conversation was had around generative AI and what credit unions need to be doing to set a foundation to implement and leverage that technology productively. We're going to be doing a follow-up. That way was so well received and there was so much ground to cover that didn't get finished in that time that we're going to do a follow-up episode of that on May 8th where Ann's going to join again. But just to get you kind of caught up on where we left it from that first one, Here are some kind of highlights and excerpts from the town hall from May 8th with Ann Legg and talking about generative AI.
I'm sure there was a ton of different use cases, right? My personal favorite so far has been helping me figure out what to do with the leftovers in my fridge. This is important things. When
Really?
I'm looking at this, like at the credit union, I want you to think about a couple things, right? Because the first thing is they're like, oh, I can see where I start messing around with it and it's cool. But then we start hearing about fraud and we start hearing about, what kind of data am I gonna put there and who's gonna use it? So I want to kind of walk through a little bit, a couple things. First of all, when we start thinking about all of this, right? I want to kind of highlight something that Kevin Martin at Schools First said. He's like, when we're thinking about this, think about the impact it's going to have at the credit union. And there's three, and I'm just going to simplify this for you. Ready? It's going to impact our members. It's going to impact our mission. That's impact our margin. All right. Those are huge. Those are all drivers of our successes. So when we think about that, we want to say, hey, what the heck am I doing this for? Okay, so my first thought needs to be my strategy, right? And I need to assess where I am. So again, using chat, how many of you have already done an AI strategic assessment, a readiness assessment? If you have, put a Y in there to see how many people have looked at where they work and how they do that and how ready is it? I'm seeing a quietness here in the audience. All right. So this is our first spot. We have to start thinking about how ready are we to use, and let's be real clear about this, generative AI is a tool. We like to think about it as like a magic box or a magic carpet or a decloaking device or whatever you want to think about it, right? But it's just a cool tool. So when we think about this, let's look at our needs, right? Let's just start off with a couple easy questions here, right? Why are we considering using generative AI? I would love to hear from you guys, either chat, open mic. Why should we be considering this? Why is this even a thing? Make life easier. Excellent. Is it right? Margin. Exactly. And members and mission. Exactly. So cool. Thank you, Scott. Speed and efficiency, right? Okay, so now we've thought about some things we want to think about, right? Those are some of the problems, right? When we look at some of the problems, we think about what's going on, and definitely talk about the overlords. Let's replace the word overlords with the word members. We got to make our members happy. So how are we using generative AI to start solving member problems? And I want you to think about member problems in a slightly different way. The member's coming to you, said credit union, to get 4 problems, just 4 problems. Those 4 problems are: the member has a transportation problem. They don't walk around saying I have an auto loan. They're like, I have a transportation problem. They have a shelter problem. They either need it, they either rent it or buy it. They have a travel and play problem. That's obviously going to be purchasing and spend, credit card. And then they have a rainy day and retirement problem. When we start thinking about generative AI and we think about the problems that they have, we have to start thinking about how are we going to solve some of those problems. Many of the things we think about are different case studies, but let's start back on that assessment. Why are we thinking about doing this? What problems? How literate is our audience right now? So if we're trying to do something that's going to spin up something really complex, that's going to be difficult to get everybody around it right now to really understand. So we have to say, okay, if we're nascent, then we need to start back and start building up our strategy, right? How are we going to maintain for risk? How are we going to maintain for quality? So let's unpack this just a little bit, right? First things first, rule number 1 is you're looking at all of this. What the heck is my business why, right? We talked about to make life better. So let's bring that back in and let's merge that in with what is my organizational why? What's that member why? And let's put that in with some of our success metrics. Okay, guys, somebody toss out something, a metric that you're like, gosh, I wish I could see this metric better. Tell me right now where you're like, ooh, I see a number on my KPIs that I just wish could be better. Throw it out. Are you guys looking at productivity? Are you looking at efficiency ratios? Are you looking at member engagement ratios? The real number of members. Oh my gosh. Yes. How many members do I have? How about products and services? Member growth. Yes. Thanks, Scott. Exactly. How about reduced expenses? How about increased revenue? When we take our 2 buckets here, right? Like the member and our organizational problems, and we take our success metrics, that's the stuff we have to think about. Okay. So when we're looking at saying, I want to figure out kind of a use case for this, I want to say, look, how is this understanding my member? Yeah, it's member self-help service, right? How do we get that member to get more from what they have right now? How do we understand that pain point?
Because the hardest part of this whole thing is going to be getting buy-in from everyone and overcoming the fear, right?
Boom, it's change. We're asking people to change. And what makes people freak out about change is change. So, how do we get them to understand what's in for them? What's the benefit? And most importantly, right? So, you've already gone to use case. I'm just saying, hey, credit union, I want to raise my hand and say I do this. I need to tell there's got to be a champion in there. It's got to be in a senior leadership position who's going to be able to say yes. There's got to be somebody who says, I'll step in and start doing it. There's got to be somebody who says, hey, I want to go do this with the board if there's going to be board oversight. We've got to get people in the room who will sponsor, who will champion, who will say yes. And then most importantly, what's that group of people are going to use it, right? Like we were just talking about maybe somebody in the call center or somebody in the front line. They want to be part of that conversation because they're going to be using it. So we have to be mindful of who's in the room. So what's our why? Who needs to be in the room, right? Who are the people? Who are we going to be cultivating to use AI? And now we need to think about how do we communicate out what we're doing? Many times we let our cool technology be in one area and then we just hope that it kind of gets out when it needs to be tested. AI is so new and so freaky, we can't really do that. We've got to get people in the room to talk about what? That I want to do it, that we're ready to do. Early stage. Why? Because we've got to figure out, is that use case we're talking about the one we need to be doing? Is it the one that's connecting up to the widest problem? Is it the one that we should be doing? Just because somebody says, I think this would be cool to use AI for, doesn't mean that that's necessarily the way. So we have to think about what's going to solve an organizational problem. That's the way we look at our criteria. Then we get to come in and say, okay, so figuring out that
So Anne, on that note,
yeah,
just to go backwards, we're actually working on something. Elliot and I are working on something for the IC that we're talking with David Lindner about expanding out to the world, and it's an AI use case database.
Yes.
But the challenge that we've seen, or what we're running into, just to come back, is to your point, it's hard to, like, the real information for those use cases is going to come from, we think, middle management, because really they're the people who are closest to process, which is where the big opportunities probably are.
Yes.
But the challenge is that they haven't been sort of educated on what AI can do and can't do and what it's safe to do. And so there's this chicken and an egg kind of thing that we've been sort of trying to think about how to overcome. Part of it is, getting them to be allowed to play with it enough that they can see. But even then, like, one of the things that happens frequently with, like, and Elliot, you'd be a good example. Elliot likes me to share my screen when I'm doing AI because he sees me do all this stuff, but I'm not thinking about it. It's just how I've gotten to the point where I've got it to do what I want it to do. But then he adopts those things and runs off with them. And then sometimes he comes back and goes, oh, and I did this too. But that kind of experimentation and work, sort of thing is in some cases being banned altogether.
How are we going to get our culture ready for this, right? How are we going to cultivate that up? And to your point, we've got to start having some communication. We got to start having some education around what it is, who can play with it. To your point, we need this early stage discussion, which says these people are going to be on a team to start messing around with it. Who are those people? And what are they going to do with it? And before we can get to that, who's going to be messing around with it and experimenting with it, we need to have somebody say, yes, we're going to do it. And we can't be fearful of it. And that's my biggest point. We've got to go all the way back to, I'm going to raise my hand and say, yes, I am going to be a sponsor. I am going to find a sponsor. And I'm going to say, these are the people that I want to start exploring it with.
Okay, so the big question someone's going to have is, by sponsor, do you mean, the person who, when, I'm just making fun here, but I know this is what people are thinking. Why won't people sponsor it? And I think that by sponsor, does that also mean that you will be responsible? And this is a problem. You and I have talked about this before on the podcast and things, this that we conflate in the credit union space, incompetence and failure. but that person who sponsors, will they also by doing that be taking on the risk and be the person that everybody goes when AI goes crazy and gives everybody a mortgage for $1? Are they the ones that are going to be the ones that get beat up on? Because I think that's the thought that
right. And that's because, and John, to that point, why would we ever let a use case get that far in the first place? So we need two people. We need two people to take on this new technology. I need somebody who champions it. That somebody has got to be that point that says, go. I want said group to do it. That's got to be a senior leader. In that group, there's got to be the person that says, I will step and I'll be the project manager of it. I'm going to get the people together. We're going to figure out use cases. Most importantly, we're going to talk about risk and not freak ourselves out, right? But say, there's many things we have to think about, right?
So the sponsor isn't there to sponsor it in production, but the sponsor is there to advocate for the discovery process.
Yes, advocate for the discovery. We've got to get somebody who said, and let's just walk through what does this tactically look like, right? I am a CEO and I say, I'm a CEO or CFO, and I say, do it. Then I pluck the person in my organization to say, who wants to do it? And somebody raises their hand. It's going to usually be the CTO, or maybe it'll be the CLO who says, I want to mess around with this. They go, great. Then you are going to get a committee. You're going to get people together in the room to discuss use cases, and you're going to report back to me. And we're going to do this at our monthly meeting, at our every 2 weeks, whatever we're going to do. We have to have that first kickoff first, because if you just have somebody say, hey, I'll do it, and there's no accountability back up, and nobody's saying you will do it at that higher level, then it's really going to be stuck in what we always do, which gets stuck in a little bit of a silo, and then nobody knows what we're doing, and it might get all the way out to putting together some sort of use case that never gets tested and just goes to the wide masses of the audience and isn't vetted properly. We've got to stop that. We've got to bring it in and say, I'm going to do it. And then I got to make sure that as I'm looking at that, I've got to say, okay, so when I bring the people together, again, that's where we go. Use cases. You want to get your leadership team together. And what you said, John, is so important. I need to get the people who will be using this tool, middle management, frontline, in the room together and say, what is that big problem? What do you wish? And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be, you guys ask us, you said leadership, ask us to know 900 different standard operating procedures. I can't do that. Can you give me something that will help me using narrative, natural language, say, how do I do a check override? How do I do just to what Scott was saying, how do I get this to be member service? And how do I do it fast and better?
You can get a full snapshot of that. I should say this is the snapshot, the full movie, if you want to go out to the cutownhall.com website. You can find the full hour replay of that show. There's a lot of other really good stuff that I wound up having to cut short here, but Ann went on with a lot more detail, a lot of back and forth with John Best on this too. As I said, we will be following up with a further conversation on this one on Wednesday, May 8th, which will be the next CU Town Hall. Always free to join. You do need to register in advance, cutownhall.com. And that is at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific on Wednesday, May 8th. Hope to see you there. With that, another episode of The Big Cast in the books. My name is Glenn Sarvati. You can find me via my firm 154 Advisors on LinkedIn, on X. You can find the Best Innovation Group at both of those places as well, at Big FinTech, or our grand poobah John Best at JB FinTech. We're on Blue Sky as well under those same handles. As I said before, you can always find out more about the firm at big-fintech.com, and at the media tab you will find all kinds of past episodes, including our earlier conversations from the NACUSO Network Conference that we just took our microphone down there and had some great conversations with some folks there. And there's actually one more of those interviews still coming up that it was, like I said, there was a great content-rich folks, lots of interesting people to talk to. So we'll be having another one of those coming up as well. At even more recent or more imminently than that, next week, if you're listening to this when it first drops, I will be down in Miami at the Nacha Payments Conference. So give a holler if you're going to be there, but we'll be planning on gathering some of the best and brightest from those minds and sharing those with you as a highlights episode coming up on a future episode, probably in 2 weeks from the time you're listening to this one on the Big Cast. Again, my name is Glenn Sarvati, and as always, thanks for listening.
Check back each week for the latest from the Big Cast. Or better yet, we hope you'll consider subscribing for free via Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. Tweet us at Big FinTech, email info@big-fintech.com, or visit us at big-fintech.com and click on the Media tab, where you can post a comment or check out our archive of hundreds of past episodes. See you next week.